So earlier you mentioned two heavyweights, China
Yeah.
and Russia. I know it's kind of a broad question, but what kinds of policies or what kind of stance do you think the US should take towards those countries, given that, say, Russia has been acting recently much more militarily,
Yeah.
much more aggressively than it has in decades, and China's building artificial islands?
So I might not be right about this, but I believe it, and I'll use it to answer your question. You all will have to probably figure this out as you go forward. Here's what I think. Remember I said that the U.S.'s path to security, both from 1950 till now, but also in the future, is through allies and partners, and that we have a very exquisitely developed and carefully managed system of allies and partners. That's clearly the path for America. If you're the status quo power, we're the status quo power, right? What does the status quo power want to preserve at all costs? The status quo, because we own the advantages. And so, but remember what I said, we're going to probably have to see places where we can relinquish some control in order to preserve power. And I think the way we'll do that is through allies and partners. Okay, let me go to Russia real quickly. Russia, if you look beyond 2020, every one of Russia's indicators, whether it's demographics, economics, the 11 time zones they're trying to manage, the ethnic composition of the country, are in decline. The Russian population itself is creeping along just under one live birth per family. And to preserve a society takes 2.1. By the way, how does the United States stay above 2.1? Immigration. That's why this conversation about immigration is so important. And that's missing in the conversation, but that is a fact. So back to the point. We preserve our society through immigration. Russia is in decline and doesn't preserve its society through that. And economically, they're in recession, and one might argue actually in depression. So if you're Putin, you say, okay, after 2020, I got nothing. I got nothing in the tank. Nobody wants my gas, nobody wants my oil. My vodka's being, pirated and, Massachusetts, they're making vodka, for God's sakes. So what am I going to do? Well, old school. I mean, it's old school diplomacy and coercion. I mean, they're going to reestablish a sphere of influence that's going to bump right up into the NATO countries. They're leaning heavily into the gray states that sit between. In 1991 to 2008, NATO pushed its eastern border 1,000 miles to the east. Now, if you're Russia, that's it's a provocative act. If you're NATO, you're just trying to make sure that like-minded countries can develop in an economic sphere of freedom, with all the freedoms that come with democracy. So we got this kind of disconnect between NATO, the United States, and Russia that really is based on they are on a much different path. They feel they have to reestablish a sphere of influence. They're doing it rather ham-handedly and, like I said, old-school coercion. And so what do? We just rely on our relationship with NATO. We strengthen NATO. We encourage NATO. And because the way we keep things stable in Europe is by ensuring that it doesn't become a bilateral conflict between Russia and the United States, but rather has the force of the NATO alliance. Okay. China. How many allies and partners does China have? Roughly. Roughly zero. They have some market partners. In China, it's all about supply chains. By the way, none of this is pejorative. I'm not saying Russia's stupid and China's, dumb and we're smart. I'm just telling you the world as I see it. China's all about supply chains. They run a supply chain down the East China Sea, South China Sea. Why is that important now and it wasn't 10 years ago? Deep water drilling, thanks to Bill Hicks. Now they can get after the oil, and now they're really interested in it. And so they're running a supply chain that way. They're running one to Africa. They're running a supply chain to South America. Okay, so their policies are all about feeding their economic engine. Where does it get tricky? When our system of allies and partners rubs into Russia's sphere of influence, and where China's supply chains run into our system of allies and partners in the Pacific. Once you understand that, in other words, once you start with an understanding of the underlying reasons that we could find ourselves in confrontation, I think you can work through it. As opposed to just saying, oh my God, China's so wrong to be trying to take over, the the Fiery Cross Reef in the South China Sea because, they want oil. They're just so wrong to do that. I think there's ways that the United States and its allies and partners can find a way to recognize China's instincts and its interest and find them to be, look, frankly, what we care about in the South China Sea is freedom of navigation. So because 80% of the commerce that goes to the western coast of the United States goes through the South China Sea. So yes, we're worried about these land reclamation things because they get cross-threaded with Japan and Philippines, our two allies. But we also don't want, the economic exclusion. We don't want China saying, okay, now this is not a pile of rocks. Now it's an island. Now it's inhabited. Now, according to the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, we're going to establish a 200-kilometer economic exclusion zone, which means you don't have free right of passage. You've got to ask permission to move through our territorial waters. Because if you do that, then we got problems with freedom of navigation. So I think it's really all about understanding what motivates them and what motivates us. And I think on that basis, we can probably deal with it.